So today we're going to talk about the very exciting news that Riot announced yesterday regarding the Valorant esports scene and what's going to be happening with Valorant. Obviously, we already knew some things about the partnership model that they were going for and whatnot. And if you want to know more about that, I'm going to leave a link in the description to Sideshow's video where he kind of explains all the pros and cons of what they're trying to do. Although some of those cons have been mitigated by what was announced today. Oh, yesterday, I should say. So let's just read through this quickly and go through this. So the first part is just like, oh, we want long-term success. Yeah, all the normal, corpo jargon. But then this is the important thing. Next year, we will be expanding challenges to cover more players in more regions. Challenges is kind of the tier 2 scene, essentially. The VRLs from Europe, if you're aware of what they are. Additionally, teams that start in challenges will have a pathway into the international leagues and eventually even global events. This is the crucial line in the entire thing. This was the major point, right? Because if you just had a franchise system with 10 teams and those 10 teams were just always there and there was no way to potentially, compete with them whatsoever, you end up with a situation where, very quickly the tier 2 scene might die out. And as soon as the tier 2 scene dies out, then you start worrying about the tier 1 scene, because that means that the tier 2 talent or, potentially very good players that are just a bit unpolished that might be in tier 2, go to other games rather than sticking with your game. And so, eventually your talent level kind of decreases as time goes on and you end up with a worse product, and then eventually maybe the whole system dies. So that is why this is so important, that these tier 2 teams can get promoted. And so therefore teams are going to be very interested, because if you get into the international league, that is going to be worth millions of dollars. And I mean, those games to get in there are going to be probably honestly higher pressure than like champs, right? Because you're playing for your org. Like millions of dollars are on the line if you win that or lose that game. It is going to be so pressure for those games and those players when they're playing in those games to get promoted. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be insane. But yeah, basically this is how the tier is going to work, right? You have global events at the top, which is, your Masters Champions like it is now. You have the international leagues, which is, those franchise leagues. But then challenges, you can get into those international leagues. And so that is what is really important here for those teams, is you can get in. And so, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second. And then you have the in-game competitive system as well, which is kind of the more like the clash system that you have in League of Legends, where it's more competitive version of ranked, basically 5v5s, and you yourself could take part in this against other teams of similar level. But now let's talk about what challenges actually is. And as I said, it kind of mirrors the VRLs from EMEA last year. So let's take a look. So in 2023, challenges will encompass more than 20 leagues around the world, ensuring every Valorant player has the path to realize their competitive dreams. These challenger leagues will provide a highly organized competitions that begin with open qualifiers and ladder the best teams into 2 splits of multi-week regular season play. Each challenger split will culminate in a playoff tournament where a single team will be crowned as that league's champion. To ensure that these players and teams receive the attention their skills deserve, the biggest challenger league will receive dedicated broadcast windows that will be scheduled to avoid conflicts with international league matches. So that's pretty big as well, obviously, for kind of eyeballs on those games, right? I mean, if it's really successful, if Valorant becomes a very successful esport, then, maybe even the tier 2 scene begins to thrive, right? And gets its own like major sponsors and whatnot. If that becomes the case, then, we are in dreamland. Yeah, you can imagine situations where maybe a player like Shroud, right, ends up in a tier 2 team. It wouldn't shock me if that was the case, right? He needs to maybe prove himself a bit more or whatever on the Valorant stage. If that did become the case, you can imagine that those tier 2 games would get a lot of eyeballs if Shroud was playing for one of the teams, right? And so this is a big deal for those teams and orgs as well, right? That they can potentially, have their own kind of, viewership numbers and viewer base that are watching those teams. So that's really great. These are the leagues that are kind of proposed right now. APAC and Asia in general is kind of what you might expect. It's kind of all of the APAC ones, plus, Korea, Japan, pretty normal. It'd be interesting to see what happens if China, if the game released in China, maybe they'll get their own league as well if that happens. EMEA is kind of the same as it was before. It does say the final list of EMEA regions is subject to change. I assume that that's to do with CIS and what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine and whatnot. So we'll have to see what happens there. But then the Americas is NA, LATAM North and South, and Brazil. And so kind of how it was before as well. But it is important to note that in EMEA, the VRLs, they did have slightly different rules and regulations, and I think that would probably be the case again, for when this starts off next year, that the kind of the individual kind of, regional Valorant group can kind of determine, what the exact rules are. Are you going to play best of ones, best of twos, best of threes, all of that kind of stuff, because they did play different versions in EMEA. But now let's talk about the big thing, which is Challengers Ascension. So this is the tournament that is going to happen, like it did with the VRL. You might have watched me co-stream it on Twitch if you were there, like, watching kind of the champions from each individual little region. They were playing in VRLs, and this is what is going to replace that, essentially, is Challengers Ascension, where essentially the best team from each, region, each of those small regions we just saw, will then get promoted into this tournament, and then they'll play this little tournament between, the however many teams it is, and then whoever wins that will be in the league for the next international year for the international league, which is going to be a crazy thing. As I said, these games, these finals of these games, are going to be worth millions of dollars, right? It's going to be so much pressure on these games. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be wild. It's going to be fun to watch these tournaments, to be honest, because there is a lot on the line. And so it definitely will be interesting to see. Now, some of you might be wondering, like, hold on a second, there's only 4 in Americas. Does that mean we're going to get like a 4-team tournament? I'm not quite sure. I kind of doubt that, right? It might be a bit different. There is actually a Washington Post article that we'll talk about in a bit that kind of explains that, it might be a bit different for each one in terms of, how many teams are in these Ascension tournaments or whatnot. So we'll have to see how that works. Maybe like, 2 teams from NA or 3 teams from the NA league go into this Ascension tournament, right? Because there is going to be a lot of NA teams, you would assume. So yeah, we'll see how that all shakes out, right? And obviously we'll need more details as that comes out. But basically what happens is you get promoted, and you get promoted for 2 years. So here it is. Challenge Ascension will earn a 2-year promotion into their territory's international league. Promoted teams will have the opportunity to prove themselves against the international league teams during the VCT season, receive similar league benefits, that's a big point, and an equal chance to qualify into Masters and Champions. After 2 years, teams will return to their league to battle their way back through Challengers and Ascension tournaments. So basically, if you aren't a part of the initial 10 teams, you have the chance to get promoted for the next 2 years, and then obviously prove yourself, that you can win. And then I would assume, with the kind of maybe monetary and kind of clout benefit that you might have, that those teams would then maybe be favorites to go back and win the Challengers and Ascension tournaments. But we'll have to see. It would be an interesting thing. Can those teams then keep their players very well? It will be interesting to see. But important thing is that they will get similar league benefits. That's a very good thing, right? And so this is how it's going to work all the way up until 2028, where teams get promoted, and then as soon as a team starts getting, relegated essentially and goes back down, which will be 2026, I think, then I think 2 teams will start getting promoted for each league as well, because obviously 1 then goes down from there after their 2nd year. So then you have 2 come up, and then so it reaches a max of 14 teams total in each league for 2027. And then, who knows what will happen from then on. I'm sure Riot doesn't even fully know at this point because it's so far in the future, so we don't need to worry about that too much just yet. But that is how it's going to work. And then going even further down the ladder, you have this, which is the in-game competitive system as well. You and your 4 friends could potentially go and compete, and if you have enough success, looking ahead to 2024, the top teams emerging from the system, which is the competitive system, will get a chance to qualify directly from the game into challenges. So you and your 4 friends, if you think you're good enough, could end up playing against different orgs and whatnot, and then I don't know what would happen really if, say 5 random people just got together, were really good, and ended up, getting into challenges, but then winning challenges, and then winning Ascension. What happened? What happens to them? Does Riot just give all the funding to just these 5 random dudes who are good at the game? I don't know. That'll be an interesting point to see what would happen. But yeah, even you yourself, could end up, on challenges and, maybe playing in these games, which would be crazy to see. So let's talk about this as well, which was a Washington Post article, which gave a bit more information as well. So from the Washington Post, you may notice the blog doesn't exactly specify how many teams qualify for Ascension events. I asked and was told the exact mechanism, quantity of teams per league, and formats may differ from territory to territory, as each of the Americas, EMEA, and Pacific have a different quantity of leagues. We plan to provide additional information on this topic later in the year in early 2023. So yeah, basically, as I said, like more than 1 NA team might make it to Ascension events. I doubt they would do a 4-team tournament. I would expect that it would at least be 8 probably for each one, hopefully, or like at least 7 for EMEA if they only have 7 regions. But yeah, I wouldn't expect them to only do a 4-team tournament, so there probably will be different ways of qualifying, and it will depend on each one. And the head of esports operation at Riot told me there were no plans to expand partnership slots at the moment. I mean, that makes sense. Was told that there was roster protections similar in those placed for League of Legends would be instituted across the international league. This is also going to be true, I think I heard, for the teams that get promoted from Ascension. They are going to have roster protections. Obviously, it would be kind of wrong if a team got, promoted or whatever, right? These 5 players got promoted and then they all just got sold, and basically the org was just selling their spot to, a different team, essentially, because I'm pretty sure that would be, like it is now, where the players are the ones that, kind of count towards actually getting it. It's the players who got there, not the org. That is also put in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I asked about Riot's stance towards rosters on track to Ascension with problematic leadership, teams, partners, and sponsors. Was told the developer were keeping a close eye on participating organizations, and less so on partnered orgs since they're already vetted. So, yeah, we'll have to see, right? What if 5 dudes did just get promoted? Who knows, right? Riot might require them to be signed to some team that, they can rely on or whatnot. We'll have to see. But, yeah, that would be an interesting situation. Obviously, it would come up if that actually happened to be the case. Obviously, you'd expect that, most orgs aren't run by, terrible people, or at least you'd hope so. So, that would just be a case-by-case basis, of course. So let's quickly do a recap then of the overall pros and cons of this system. What's going on? Well, the pros are pretty much everything, to be honest. This is a great way of having a healthy tier 2 scene overall. There's a big incentive to still be involved in Valorant because, as I said, if you do get promoted into this international league, that is a big deal, and it's worth a lot of money probably, or at least it should be, hopefully. So it's going to be a thriving esport potentially, right? It seems pretty well set up, right? There's ample opportunity for each team. You do only get 2 years, in the actual franchise system. So those 10 teams that get picked, they're in there for however long that contract is, right? And then, these teams that get promoted are only there for 2 years. I understand that might be a bit of a problem maybe with how the system might work, but I understand why Riot would want to do that. Let's talk about some negatives, or some negatives, proposed negatives that I've seen, right? One is the lack of relegation, right? Basically, the league is just getting bigger, and these teams that do stay for their second year, they get automatically relegated. There's nothing they can do. Those 10, franchise teams that get selected, they're in there no matter what, and so there isn't a relegation, right? And let me talk about why there isn't a relegation, and why I didn't expect there to be either. So basically, when you start up any kind of esports league or sports league, you're not going to have relegation because you need some kind of security. You need some kind of foundation. You can't have it be the case where, let's say, Sentinels were in the American league, right, and they got relegated, and your viewership, decreased by like a third. That's not a good look, right? That is not how you want to set this whole thing up. You do not want that to be the case at all, right? So you need to protect yourself against that exact thing happening. You need to build up a base, right? And I know that relegation, particularly for people in Europe, particularly people who like football, it's kind of like a foundational part of what's going on. But let me explain what happened actually with the history of football. So the first football league was set up in England in 1888, and there was no relegation. There was 12 teams in the league to start off with. That kind of grew as time went on, and there was no relegation. Then they added a second league where there was promotion and relegation in between those 2 leagues. But again, the bottom teams of the second league weren't automatically relegated. And then they added a third league and a fourth league, and still all the way up until 1986, teams did not get automatically relegated from whatever the bottom league was until 98 years after the initial league was founded, right? And instead what they had was a re-election process where teams, whoever finished bottom of the league, would basically tell the other teams, well, we deserve to still be in the football league because, we've got all these things going for us, right? And then teams, not even necessarily the top team that finished in those other non-leagues, as they were called then, those teams would apply basically to take that team's spot, and the rest of the teams in the football league would basically have a vote on who would basically be the team in the football league for the future, right? So they didn't have proper full relegation until 1986, which is 98 years after it was initially founded. because you need a sense of stability, right? And you will see that today as well, right? You can take a look at other sports leagues that get set up as well. Like in India, for instance, there was a pretty new league set up, or a new kind of type of league set up in like the late 2010s or something. And they're not doing relegation until like 2025, right? Until like 8-9 years into the league's existence, they're not having promotion or relegation. And this is a football league, right? Football is an established thing across the world. It's the most popular sport in the world by a way. And, it still doesn't have full promotion relegation for new leagues that are set up, because you need that foundation stability. So there's just no way that you could expect that there's going to be relegation. With that in mind as well, the other thing I've seen a lot of people talk about is what happens if a team just tanks, right? What happens if, one of those teams that's guaranteed a spot just tanks? Well, that probably isn't going to happen. And let me tell you why that probably isn't going to happen. One, obviously pride and things like that, right? You get into esports to compete. So, it would be kind of weird. And Valorant is probably a big enough esport to where if you did just tank in Valorant and didn't try at all and just tried to, make some money, basically, that's gonna follow you around to other esports, right? Like, you're gonna be known. Valorant is a big enough game that, you're gonna be known as that org from then on, probably. So, it's a bit risky for a team to do that anyway. But secondly, you have to remember who's funding the league, because it's not the teams. The teams are getting in there for free. In fact, the teams are receiving money from Riot and the sponsors to be in this league, right? For the teams, it's a no risk, all reward situation for them, right? And so the reason that Riot is footing the bill and not the teams, like in other esports, the teams often are the ones that are footing the bill. Instead of that, Riot are footing the bill, and they're not doing that out of the kindness of their own heart. They're doing that so that they can keep the power with them, right? Because they're footing the bill, they get the power to, decide if rules are going to change in the league, or, if maybe a certain team is tanking. I'm sure Riot has a provision in their contract to say, oh yeah, if you piss us off enough, we'll just kick you out. And there's nothing you can do about it, because we're the ones fighting the bill, not you. So, deal with it. And yeah, I'm sure that would be the case. And I'm sure that certain orgs would get, more leeway, more popular orgs, more ones that bring viewership, might get a bit more leeway than others, but Riot has the power, right? So I wouldn't be worried at all about a team tanking, because I'm sure Riot in those contracts with those teams can say, yeah, if we decide that you have, made a big mistake, or you're costing the league in some sort of way, we'll just kick you out, because we're the ones that are footing the bill. So what are you going to say, right? And that essentially will be in the contracts, I'm sure, for each team that they sign, and the teams will still sign that contract because for them it's a great deal. So yeah, I'm sure that will be the case, and so I wouldn't worry about that either at all. Basically, this is all good. That is basically what it's going to be. We'll have to see when 2027 or 8 comes around. We'll all be old by that point, so, we'll have to see what happens then. But for the general health of the game, this is amazing, right? This is amazing. This is like the best thing that they could have announced. I really mean that. This is about as perfect as it could be. Obviously there are going to be some limitations to what they can do, because, again, you need that security, things like that. This is as good as it could possibly be. This is a great system, and, it brings me a lot of hope for the future of Valorant. This is like the most hope you could possibly have. You're already seeing teams that, might have dropped their rosters from tier 2 teams, already kind of being like, oh, well, we're back in, right? We're back in, because, yeah, of course you are, because you have the chance to potentially, make a big name for yourself if you are a smaller org by winning these things, and that would be a great opportunity for these orgs as well. This is about as good as it could be, and it's all just great, essentially. That's my overall takeaway. This is about as good as it could be.